Thanks to our panellists for, I think, very ably setting out the motion there and giving us, I think, a recipe for beating London. I think, I'll sign up to that one. It's now time to throw the motion open to the floor, and this is how we're going to do it. If you want to put your hand up, a roving microphone will find you.
Hello, my name's Jason. I just think one thing, I'm a bit disappointed in. We've had 4 speakers, and you would think that education stopped when you were 21. It doesn't. I mean, I got my degree last week when I started my course at 37, and I think people need to think that education doesn't stop at 21. We need to have a conversation about what happens for people who are in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s.
Yes?
My name is Barry Buxton. First of all, I'd just like to alter the title of the debate a little by suggesting that it's perhaps education as a one-size-fits-all system is failing our economy. And I think there is perhaps some evidence of that if you look at core GCSE results by racial group, where we find that those of Chinese origin come up at the top of the table, and there's a lot of stratification through other Asians and further on down through the categories until you get right at the bottom to children of white British origin, particularly those on free school meals, who underachieve consistently in that regard. I'd like to bring something else into the discussion, that is that we've heard that it's not the educationalists that are at fault, and I would challenge that. They can't all be that good. We've dumped on the politicians as being the ones who are at fault here. I'd leave you with a further thought, and that is the parents. Given the stratification results I just described, I would suggest that it's also the parents of those in education who are failing our economy.
Thanks, Barry. A third one? Yeah, I've got one down the back.
Hello, my name is Eric Liddell. I'd like to thank the panellists. I felt a little bit like the husband tossing about in bed, having an argument with his wife and lots of different smart answers.
We're all waiting to see the answer in bated breath now.
Yeah, well, I think what I'd like to do with the whole I do have a million things to say, but I'd like to commend the young people and the leaders who've come into this debate tonight. I'd certainly like to commend them and ask the question, in our education system, how is their presence here tonight going to be marked, graded, assessed? These are going to be people who are very, very employable, and yet there's no room on the report card.
Alan, if you could respond to Jason about the over 21s.
Okay. I think it's a really important point you make. And given that I run a college which has lost 2.6 million from our adult skills budget in the last 2.5 years, which we use to help people like you get back into education, that's a really pressing and difficult problem. However, there is a reason I suspect why the debate largely focuses on schools, and that's because we have to be realistic about the amount of money that we're spending, and we need to get better outcomes out of schools and colleges. And I think what everybody's been trying to talk about are some of the issues and obstacles that sit behind that. So there should always be opportunities for people to go back, but we also have to improve the numbers of people who actually complete their education by the time they are 21 or 22, because I do think that affects their life chances in lots of interesting and important ways. We do have a lot of obstacles in the system as to why too many people still come out without the knowledge and the skills that they need. I'll give you a very brief example. My college educates 40% of the young people who leave school in Oldham. 75% of those leave with literacy and numeracy skills around year 9 or below, in terms of their actual levels of skills. And that's a really, really huge obstacle in terms of their ability to go on and do what you've done. And we do have to understand those issues and understand what's behind them.
Thanks, Alan. Deborah, can we just ask you to respond to the issue around ethnicity there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you drill down into the figures of achievement, white working class boys in particular are the ones at the bottom of the pile. And I think that kind of taps into something that we heard as well about the success rates in London. If you look at London, the achievement in London looks phenomenal, and it is. The raising of standards in London has been quite extraordinary. But there are also two factors there that don't often get talked about. One is London has a very high population of aspirational immigrant students. And if you've made the effort to move to another country for a better life, you know, the emphasis you place on education, the power you give to your children to believe they can succeed is really important. The other thing in London, if you look at demographic shifts of population in London over the past 5 years, there's been a huge shift out of the city of poor, white, working class population, largely because they simply can't afford to live there anymore, and largely because councils, a lot of Tory-led councils in fact, are offering cash incentives to working class families to get out of London and move to places like Birmingham. So what we have, or Manchester indeed, so what we have is a demographic influx of those populations at the same time that London is getting an outflux of them. Then if you look at those children, they are particularly boys, and they are particularly from chaotic home family, from chaotic backgrounds. If you look at some of the research into the impact of long-term stress on the brain chemistry of children, but particularly male children, you'll find that those children in particular suffer from high levels of cortisol. And cortisol has several impacts on health. It has an impact on the immune system, it depresses the immune system, so those children are more likely to be off school for long periods of time through illness. It also makes boys particularly angry and lose empathy, so they tend to have behavioural problems, they tend to be more likely to be excluded from school, and it also leads children to memory loss. So what we often find is that those young, white, working class boys from highly chaotic families, from suffering sometimes from abuse or from poverty or various hunger even, are triply hit. They're hit in terms of mental health, they're hit in terms of physical health, they're hit in terms of cognitive capacity. And education alone cannot solve that. This is a much bigger problem for society. We have to work at lifting children out of poverty and reducing their stress, because otherwise teachers are just beating their heads against the wall on that count.
Could you just respond around the one-size-fits-all proposition?
I don't really have anything to say about one size fits all, because the comment was about ethnicity, and I see how that connects to one size fits all. Can I comment about young people being commended for being here tonight? Just because I think it's good to respond. Of course you should be commended for being here tonight, but sort of slightly counterintuitively, the gentleman who mentioned that it should be noted or measured or marked that they had, I think that's part of the problem with the way... Okay, but that... No, but noted. Okay, but it's not you I'm talking about. I'm talking about a system that is now constantly measuring everything that everybody does. And I think... I was going to say, I note that in my daughters, who now just texted me saying, "Where are you, Mum?" And it's hard. I was so interested in what you said, the second speaker, about how much better our system has become. I just really wrestle with this because, and you talked about teach first, and in a way I thought there was a contradiction in what you had said. Why are so many teachers leaving? Why is there so much stress if the system is so much better? And I think it's because teachers are being asked to do impossible things, which includes measuring absolutely everything. But it's back to that sterility argument. How can we encourage all of us to do things because we love doing them, because they're worth doing, rather than just it adding up to a qualification, a mark, a next move in life? Yeah, it was not getting it.
I'm not going to allow the debate to continue. You want to make one comment, will you?
Yeah.
Quick.
I wanted to respond to what Melissa said. I'm not saying that everything is hunky-dory in the education system. It's absolutely not. I do stand by what I said about some of those good things being introduced, including a big role for Ofsted and more testing and teach first and so on. But clearly, there's other policies that have happened. I would argue, particularly under the coalition and the Conservative government now, that are undermining those good reforms and making life very difficult for teachers. There just aren't enough teachers in the country. So put aside for one moment the question of how good our teachers are, and are some teachers leaving the teaching profession because actually they can't cut it. I don't think that is the main reason why most teachers leave the teaching profession. There just aren't enough teachers at the moment. There's no point in giving more autonomy to head teachers over their budgets if head teachers' budgets are being cut in real terms year on year, which is what is happening at the moment. And I do absolutely think that we've got to have rigor, real rigor in the system. Because if you don't have some rigor in the education system, you will fail a lot of kids, and you will particularly fail poor kids, and that was clearly the experience in the past. But it is possible, I believe, to have really high quality education that addresses the needs of people who want to go down an academic route and a vocational route with high standards, but still have happy schools where kids feel safe and confident, where every kid has the chance to be good at something, schools that are still full of creativity and music and drama and sport. I believe that is possible.
Okay, 3 more at the back.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Verity. Thank you very much for everything you said tonight. So I started to really care about this after uni, because I was one of the 93% of people that went to a state school, and at uni I befriended a lot of the 7% who go to independent schools, and I was really envious of their education because they were so well-rounded, so confident, they had amazing exam success, but also musical success, sports success, and other successes in the arts. And then I got my first graduate job in the city, and there were no state school kids. And it was the same for my friends who went into law and who went into property. And then I left the city and I went to advertising in London, and still there were no state school kids. So my kind of answer to this, and I hear all you're saying about the different ways to interpret the question, but that I still feel like the state is failing people through its education from reaching their human potential. But then secondly, it's failing the economy, because if 7% of people dominate the well-paid industries, what would happen if those industries were expanded by the 93% of people who aren't in them at the moment?
Okay, thanks for that. With the glasses, that's right, in the middle there, desperately waving.
There's far too much stress on teachers at the moment for grading and assessing everything, which is actually paying detriment to the pastoral aspect of raising these children in the education system, which in turn is affecting the results of certain students. I do agree with what the gentleman said, in that minorities aren't getting the success that they should be, they aren't getting the opportunities, but certainly not just white males. Absolutely, we have black young men that probably higher a higher statistic than those same counterparts, and obviously you've got females. And again, as a black male, I went to a grammar school and whatnot. For me, as soon as I left high school, there weren't many opportunities available for me, even though I had my GCSEs and I had A-levels and this and the other, because I didn't have work experience, because I didn't have any sort of real life experience. There weren't many opportunities available to me. If I don't want to go to university, how on earth am I supposed to contribute to the economy? So I guess that thing.
Thanks. Melissa, that one's for you.
My name is Ashley, I'm 14. I go to Oasis Academy in Peter City. I'm in year 9, and we're currently, because it's near the start of the year, we're currently doing constant mini tests. Without having lessons to fill them out to answer the questions correctly, and then they get sent out to the government, and then we have lessons and more tests. It's as if we made a vast improvement in a small space of time, and it makes Oasis look good when actually they've cheated away out of improving, and it feels as if it's wasting our time. So why?
And this part of me, because I don't really understand the whole question, education is failing our economy. I view it as education is actually failing our society as a whole. Because we've heard them speak about how it affects the politicians and how kids are entering one route, which is medicine alone, and how that route is going to get blocked up soon. So I can't seem to understand. But at the end of the day, I searched what the economy is, and he kept on bringing this idea of distribution, commercial goods, goods and services, so on and so forth. But until we start an educational system that is ready to develop the next generation of critical thinkers who will challenge these politicians, who will challenge the idea that investing in our current situation is better than investing in our youth or our future, we will not change, things will not change. So for now, why don't we make the best of our situation? Why don't we strip away these ideas of no work experience or them removing the whole subject of citizenship out of the curriculum? Why don't we fight for what we believe in? Why don't we inspire the next generation?
Your last point, why don't we stand up for what we believe in? I'm going to put a bit of what some might see as utopianism or a lack of realism into the debate, but to me it seems absolutely central. It begins with your point about the 93% and the 7%. As long as we have the wealthy educated separately from the rest of us and given all that advantage, of course they're always going to have, you know, all these qualities, and those who have got exactly the same results but gone to schools that are about community and mixed are for some reason going to feel less entitled. Finland is a good example of an education system that does a lot of what we said tonight. People often mention it, but the most interesting thing about Finland is what they did about their system structurally. Politicians, sorry, I'm going to have to knock them again, always say, let's not talk about structural things, but structural things are really important. In the late 60s and 70s, they had a system very like ours, which was they had the private schools at the top, selective state schools, and then the rest, and there was a huge gap in quality between them and all the status problems that we have lived with in this country for a century and a half. I mean, we are useless at egalitarianism. It's as bad as it ever was. And they had a debate about creating a genuinely egalitarian system, and they abolished their private schools. You couldn't do that here. Michael Gove had suddenly discovered the importance of the European Union and the rights of people not to. But they did abolish their private schools, they abolished their selective schools, and they set up one system, not one size fits all, but one system for everyone, and they then became one of the best systems in Europe. Very different society, less inequality and so on. But until I just don't think we can keep saying to state school pupils, you can aspire to be like these people who have had everything and are told that they're entitled. And I'm really not tired with you, but I'm tired of that debate. We have to make changes so that everybody goes to we have the same system for everybody. And that seems to me that's what I believe in. I think that's just really, really important.
I'll try and sort of briefly address two of those issues. The private-state divide at those levels of employment is largely not down to the quality of education that those people have had, but whether or not their parents can afford to fund them through unpaid internships, through high levels of rent in London, and so on and so forth. I know my son at the moment is living, in a single room and paying almost £1,000 a month just for the privilege of living in London. He can't work in advertising outside of that city. And I know exactly what you mean. However, we've got to be really careful about this, because what we're finding is that children from state schools are getting into Russell Group universities, Oxford and Cambridge in particular, and then being doubly hammered when they graduate with the label of being elite, and saying that they're not entitled to those jobs because they've come through elite universities, having fought tooth and nail to get there. So we really have to look at giving equal access. The network of connections that privately educated children have. They know the people who work in the city, they know the people who are at the bar, they know the people who are consultants in hospital. They get the work experience, they get the internship through that network of connections. And that's what state schools really need to develop. They need to develop the partnerships with business, the wider business community, to give children that advantage. When we come to your point, Ashley, and I completely sympathise with you, having been a teacher and having beaten my children through the same system, teachers at the moment are being held accountable to this question, what works? And that all of us are kind of being asked to account for our test results, our exam results. So whenever we look at research, or whenever we look at how the brain works or how education works, it's done with the single-minded focus of what will get kids through tests. Now that's a massive problem for us, and you know, it's a bigger problem than any of us can solve now. Now one of the answers to that is regular low-stakes testing helps children to pass bigger, high-stakes tests. So what you end up with is this endless cycle of being tested. I think we've really got to question that, because actually when you look at schools who don't follow that pattern, who don't think, how do we get kids through tests, but how do we give kids a great education whereby the test is a byproduct of a great education, which is exactly what Eton and Wellington and those private schools do, then you start to get an education system where children really succeed, but they're not being pushed through that relentless testing system that you're experiencing. And then we get critical thinkers, if we come back to that point as well.
Great. I'm going to take that link into Nick, who's going to respond to Samuel's question now.
Great. Fantastic question, Samuel, and very, very well delivered, thank you. I absolutely agree that critical thinking and challenge to politicians, local level, national level, whoever's in power, absolutely essential. And I do believe that one of the things education needs to do, as I said at the start of my speech, is to help young people to become good citizens, to have the confidence to think for themselves and challenge people in authority. That might not go down very well with teachers, but I think if you're in the teaching profession, you should welcome that and embrace that and be able to deal with that. I think here in Greater Manchester, we are going to have an opportunity to shape our own destiny as a society in this city region, and also on our economy and our education, crucially. In a couple of years' time, people will have a chance to vote, and you may well be old enough to vote, Sam, yourself, on who's going to be the elected mayor of Greater Manchester. I really hope that education is a massive issue in that election campaign. I really hope that all the candidates for being mayor of Greater Manchester have a really strong, integrated, ambitious and sort of humane policy on improving our education system here in Greater Manchester, and make specific pledges to parents and young people across Greater Manchester. And if they don't keep those promises, whoever wins, I hope they get kicked out of office 4 years later.
Thanks, Nick. Alan?
I want to pick up on 2 points, which I think are very important. One of the things that I do think is very positive about recent educational reform has been the emphasis on knowledge in the curriculum. And to pick up on the points that some of our people contributions have made around standing up for yourself and so on, and critical thinking. Critical thinking happens when you know things well. You're able to think critically about something because your knowledge is good. And the whole emphasis about knowledge in the curriculum, I think, has been a massive positive thing. However, it's deeply compromised by 2 things. And I think the point that Deborah made earlier about if we compare the Etons or the Wellington colleges, the state system is true. Those young people do very well, not just because they're privileged, but they also come out of school and university knowing things that are powerful. They have powerful knowledge. And the problem that you're describing in the school that you're in, sorry, I don't know your name, but with the Manchester United Ashley, about testing, I think is a really big problem, because actually we've got a policy that says knowledge and powerful knowledge is very important, and actually that's very important for everybody. If young people don't grow up knowing powerful things, how the world works, being able to question the assumptions behind things in science and technology and politics and history, and to use that knowledge to develop their critical thinking, they are disempowered in their lives politically and economically, and that's one of the reasons knowledge is very, very important. However, it's hugely compromised by a performance system that ends up with what you've described. So you spend more time in your classes being tested than learning new things. Now there has to be some kind of a balance, because you do have to know knowledge. That's the whole point of it. The more you know, the more you're able to develop your knowledge and your understanding, and the more you're able to be critical and creative and so forth. But at the moment we have a system where in some schools that knowledge curriculum is going well. In most schools the performance system is contradicting that. And I'd also make a second point, which I think it actually questions a lot of the assumptions that the panel and some of you have made. The measure of the education system can't just be that success is access for everybody to those jobs in the city or to jobs as lawyers, etc., etc. The measure surely has to be that people have to come out of an education system going into professions of their choice that all have some dignity to them. We mentioned earlier plumbers who do philosophy. Actually, a really good curriculum around vocational education would not just teach people how to plumb, it would teach them how to understand the philosophy behind plumbing, which is a much different question. And that raises a really important challenge, because if you and we all judge the education system by how many young people are able to be socially mobile and achieve those high skills, high paid jobs, it's always going to fail. And what we need is an education system much more like Germany, where 70% of students in Germany go to vocational schools, but vocational disciplines in Germany are seen as having high respect and as being not just a qualification, but a professional discipline that has standing in society as well as economically.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to say that the results are now in, I believe. So Mike is going to tell you what the outcome of our tested debate is.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to commend Brendan for chairing this with great distinction, humour, wit and verve, as I expected he would do. And I'd like to thank, I think, an absolutely outstanding range of speakers that we've had tonight. Not just the 4 outstanding speakers on the panel, but those of you who've had the opportunity to make a contribution from the floor as well. And for that, I'd like you all to give you a sign of your appreciation. I've been reminded tonight, ladies and gentlemen, why we do this. Not only is it to exercise this muscle, this organ that we have between our ears, to make us feel very proud and to do something other than just go out and have a few drinks and dance on tables. But it's also, Deborah mentioned something earlier that really struck me, and it was the opportunities for people from privileged backgrounds to operate in those circles and to get those opportunities and to meet friends of their father. When I was a business journalist, I used to get phone calls frequently from the business people that I used to meet and interview and network with, and it would go along these lines. My daughter would love to become a journalist. Could she come to spend a couple of days in your office and do some work? And I used to say the same thing, get them to ring me. Now I want those opportunities to be afforded to lots of different people, not just outside our networks, and in our own very small way. I'd like to think that we've started our own network. When we do debates of this size, when we do debates like we had at the Science Museum 2 weeks ago, and we attract young people like we did tonight, that's our network. So don't just go home tonight at the end of this and think, oh, I went to this debate tonight, it was really interesting, I heard some great speakers, and there were some young people there. Come and introduce yourself. If you've got a business and you're looking to recruit, if you're looking to find out a little bit more, if you've been curious enough to come along tonight, be curious enough to come and introduce yourself to Samuel, and to all the other people from the Reclaim Project and the sixth formers that we get to come along to these debates and come along in the future as well. That's just my little plea to you tonight, because this isn't just an event. We think we're creating something really special, a network, a movement. The other thing that was mentioned a lot, that Nick just touched on as well, was Devo Mank. We want to make that our agenda in 2016 for these debates. We want to place a creative, exciting, modern vision of what devolution can bring for Manchester. Not just to take those 8 words that are at the end of virtually every paragraph in the devolution Act that's going through Parliament at the moment, and those horrible 8 words are at the discretion of the Secretary of State. We want to do a little bit better than that, and I want this to be the start of a part of that forum to really energise that debate. Are you with me? Can we do that? Brilliant. Well, let's do it. But you're all just chewing your nails wondering what the results of the debate are. I don't think it's going to be any surprise. When we started, ladies and gents, we said that pretty much 50% of you were in favour of the motion that education is failing our economy, 20% of you were in favour, were against the motion, and 30% were undecided. Nick and Alan, I've got bad news for you. You didn't win out over any of the waivers. I can duly therefore declare that the winner of tonight's debate is Melissa and Deborah.